You're all very welcome to the session today where we're going to be looking at finding and remixes images and videos for teaching and learning. Um, I'm really not, I'm really going to try and get through this in the next 40 to 45 minutes so as to avoid taking up an hour of everyone's time. And there will be a number of additional kind of training sessions over the course of the week. And if you do have any questions, please feel free to get in touch and anything we don't cover today, we can try and cover over, as a follow-up activity. So what I'm hoping to look at today is really just to talk a bit about licensing and ethical attribution, and then the process of sourcing images, sourcing videos, remixing images, remixing videos, and help and support. And if we have time, I'm open to do a very quick activity at the end of the session with everyone. So a good place to begin is really to maybe talk a little bit about licensing and ethical attribution. So when we think about using somebody else's media, someone else's art or video or audio or anything at all, really, their teaching material, anything, um, there's a number, I think, of broad considerations which are worth kind of factoring in. So one key element is the suitability for purpose. Obviously, that is, I always think of it personally as kind of a selfish reason, because if something isn't really going to fit my teaching needs, if it's not going to give my students, something which is relevant to my own teaching plan, it's not really going to be of much use to anyone. It's going to use up their energy and resources, which means they have less time and attention to actually follow the teaching plan and the content which I've put together. So suitability for purpose is kind of an obvious one, but you'd be surprised, or maybe you would be, how often it's something which is, I suppose, kind of ignored or not kind of properly factored in terms of using other teaching material, or in particular things like open education resources. The context in which it is provided is obviously very important also. So, teaching in higher education, something which was developed, which was intended for secondary school students, is probably not going to be of much use to us, and something which is developed for primary school students is going to be of less use again. So again, context is very important, and if it is possible to identify, looking to use someone else's material, if it is important to try and identify um, whether who it was developed for and what the purpose of the developer was. Um, the format used is obviously an important element as well, in particular when it comes to media. You want some form of media, some form of imagery or video or similar, which is going to kind of fit your purposes, in particular in term elements such as file size, whether there is the ability to edit it, the overall quality of the media which has been produced, so on and so forth. Licensing issues, free to use, free to modify, we'll talk about in a little bit. And other restrictions then kind of, yeah, is really anything else that you can think of. Generally, and please don't take this as gospel because it's a very kind of loose statement, but in general, um, working as an educator, there is a certain, degree of understanding, or what I call, I guess, wiggle room in terms of using other people's material. Very often, a lot of content which is provided, if it is being used for an educational purpose, there is a certain amount of leeway which we as teachers are given in terms of using somebody else's work. Now, that's not to say that that overrules copyright or elements such as that, but generally it has been established in a number of, I suppose, kind of, legal battles or kind of arguments that if something is being used for educational purposes, there is a certain amount of understanding or a certain amount of leeway educators get when using somebody else's material. But generally, when we talk about using someone else's material, what we're really talking about is intellectual property rights. And in particular, that is something I think on the part of the developer. So the artist who created the image or the video or the piece of training material, so on and so forth. And IPR basically refers to the legal rights they have in terms of what they have developed. And the idea with this is that it's designed to, as identified there, avoid exploitation and ensure that you, as the creator of the material, have some degree of control over how your work is being used. So some degree of decision making around uh, how your work is being used and what is being done to it. Now, that is not to say that it is, if you are the creator of a piece of media or training material and you make it kind of freely available, that's not to say that it's an easy process to track what how your work is being used, in what context, whether it's being changed or amended, so on and so forth. So um, it's not a straightforward solution, or there is no kind of straightforward answer or perspective in terms of tracking. It generally operates on a process of goodwill because it is very hard to track when something is made available out into the ether. It is very hard to track whether it's being used, in what context it's being used, so on and so forth. So a lot of this is really based around obviously legal obligations in terms of IPR, but more generally or more commonly, just kind of good ethical use um, or principled, good ethical principles when you are using somebody else's media. So key factors in terms of IPR online are things like who's created it, who's linking to it, who hosts it. And all of those bring with them their own kind of responsibilities, particularly around, for example, who hosts it. And there's a number of different kind of licenses which can be used as a way of protecting or kind of safeguarding or making our work available. So copyright, I think, is something we'd all be pretty familiar with. Set of rights which protects individual ownership of property. And as the owner of copyright, you can decide, you can display it, you can decide what the work can be used for, in what context it can be displayed, whether if someone else is using it, they should take it down or not using it and use it in a particular way. If you want people to be able to make derivative versions, so alternative versions of the work that you produced. Public domain then is material which is no longer under copyright. So that is material which was under copyright, but the duration for copyright on it has expired. Um, and the thing about public domain is that when something is public domain, it is generally kind of freely available. It is generally, once something is in the public domain, it can be linked to, it can be amended, it can be provided, it can be used in a kind of wide variety of contexts. Just wondering, does anybody know of anything, if you want to put your answers into the Q&A, or if you want to put up your hand, and I can give you mic access. Does anybody know of anything recently which came into the public domain after a long, long time of being in copyright? So Steamboat Willie, the original Mickey Mouse cartoon, actually kind of the copyright for that expired pretty recently, and almost immediately there was people making slasher films and various other elements pretty much on the day that the copyright for Mickey Mouse expired. So once something is in the public domain, it's freely available. Material which I think broadly for our purposes would be useful, which is in the public domain, is essentially any kind of older material. So in particular, you could think about things like classical music is obviously in the public domain. There is no copyright associated with that. Older imagery or kind of, material which kind of is over 80 years old or so, that is freely available in the public domain. It's why kind of, classical books, or excuse me, text of classical books, elements like that, they're actually quite easy to find because they're all in the public domain. So they usually someone is hosting it without any fear of copyright infringement. Copy free then is, I suppose, not quite the opposite of copyright, but it is a form of licensing which allows for free use of material. So if something is under a copy-free license, there's no restrictions on its use, on its distribution, on its modification, or on its benefits. So if something is under a copy-free license, you can use it in whatever way you want to. You can use it for teaching, you can use it to make money, you can amend the material in whatever way you see fit, you can distribute it however you want, so on and so forth. Copyleft then is something kind of like a step back copy free. So what copyleft does is it's not as open and as loose as copy free. It just removes restrictions, a lot of restrictions on distributing and modifying. And in particular, copyleft, the most popular and the most commonly used copyleft licenses are known as Creative Commons licenses. What Creative Commons licenses do is they basically allow you to release material, but to put very specific definitions around how you want that material to be used, or in what context it can be used, or what someone can do with the material, or what obligation they have to share and share alike. So Creative Commons licenses basically are a way of selecting a number of different kind of licensing elements, which can determine how your material can be used once it's made available. So you can see on the right hand side, there's actually 4 different Creative Commons kind of elements, which can be applied to any piece of work. So when you make something available into the public domain, not into the public domain, but when you make something more widely available, what you can do is you can basically determine, you can release material and associate one or more of these licensing elements with it. And through that, it clearly determines how the material can be used, under what conditions, whether someone can change it, amend it, so on and so forth. So the important thing, if we come across a piece of material and we want to use it in our teaching, and that piece of material is made available under a Creative Commons license, basically what the key thing that we have to do is we have to abide by the terms of the license, and we have to give credit. So, for example, the most open form of Creative Commons licensing is just this thing called by. All that really means is that you have to attribute it. You have to, when you use the material, you have to identify where it came from and who developed it. The most restrictive version then includes other elements like attribution, but also non-commercial, which means the material can't be used for for commercial purposes, for making money, and non-derivatives, which means that you can't amend it in any way. So there's 4 elements in terms of Creative Commons licensing. Attribution, which is simply you must attribute who developed this material originally. Non-commercial, which means you can use the material, but you can't use it for the purpose of making money. It can't be used in any commercial context. No derivative works means that you can use the material, but you can't change it in any way. And share alike means that you can use the material, but whatever you use the material in, you have to make that available under a Creative Commons license yourself. So it's through the addition or the absence of these various kind of Creative Commons licensing elements is how we determine or how you can tell how you can use a piece of material, in what context, whether you need to make it available yourself, whether you can use it for money-making purposes or not, whether you can change it, so on and so forth. So when we come across material in the wild and they have a Creative Commons license, basically we just need to abide by the terms of that license. Similarly, if you want to make your own work or your own material more publicly available, you can make the material available, but you can associate a Creative Commons license with it. And through the addition or absence of these various elements, you're essentially telling people how they can use the work, in what context, so on and so forth. Does that make sense? If anybody has any questions, please do feel free to throw them into the Q&A as I'm going along, and I'll answer those as they come up. But Creative Commons is the most popular and the most, I suppose at this stage, really the most effective way of offering material under copyleft licensing. So an example would be something like this, where this this image is available. And we can see that the Creative Commons license for this is that it is under a Creative Commons license. We have to give attribution. We can't use it for commercial purposes. And whatever we use this material in, we have to share alike ourselves. So attribution, non-commercial, share alike. So even if something doesn't have a Creative Commons licensing associated with it, there are a number of elements to maybe learn from Creative Commons. So good general practice, if you do want to use material which came from somewhere else, which you are not the original author of, general good practice is simply to give attribution to the source of the original. So to identify where you found it, to provide context or commentary for the material being used where appropriate. So, you know, to provide attribution and also to give some kind of sense of, you know, what you're using it for, or why you're using it in this in the course or in the slide or in whatever you're producing. And also good general practice as well is to use only the relevant parts of the material instead of reproducing the material in its entirety. So simply to only use the bits in the material which are relevant to you or which fit your purposes, as opposed to kind of throwing every single bit of the material up on screen or making it fully available. And obviously that has benefits as well in terms of avoiding extraneous material, avoiding unnecessary additional material for learners. Again, hopefully that makes sense. Those are just kind of good general practice guidelines. But if anybody does have any questions about Creative Commons or copyleft or anything, please do feel free to throw any questions or any comments into the Q&A area. Generally, how I think about Creative Commons licensing myself or about kind of attribution elements like that is it's essentially a bit like referencing. So we're always telling students to reference appropriately to make sure that they're not, that there's no danger of them plagiarizing anybody else's work by not referencing adequately. So really, the use of Creative Commons elements like that, it's really kind of the same principle. It's just avoiding any suggestion that you're passing material off as your own and making sure that you're identifying somebody else's work in an adequate way. So it's not a particularly complicated process when you get down to it. And I suppose there are no like hard and fast rules around appropriate attribution or so on and so forth. Like referencing, it's generally just good practice. It's kind of the ethical, honest thing to do. So, if you're ever kind of confused about how to adequately attribute work or how to use somebody else's work, it really is the same as when I yell at students to reference correctly. Sourcing images then is a process whereby we can simply find, there's a number of useful resources out there which provide images in particular that can be generally freely used. So rather than going into Google search and pulling down the first image that you see, there are a number of websites set up which are freely available where material is made available under Creative Commons licenses or even under copy-free licenses. That said, it is still important to try and ensure you give attribution where requested or required, and if they're released under Creative Commons license, to abide by the terms of that license. So a couple of websites which are popular in this respect are things like Unsplash, Pexels, Pixabay, Flickr, Creative Commons Search, Wikimedia, and the Noun Project. So there's a wide range of different kind of websites which provide the service, and they are more and more becoming available all the time. So generally, these are useful resources because you can find images and you can use them without any fear that you're not, using them in an ethical way. All of these websites will provide clear guidelines on how you can use material, and whether you are obliged to use it for non-commercial purposes, to attribute the work, so on and so forth. Also, because of Office 365, there's a number of different kind of stock images and Bing images that can be used. I think under the terms of MTU's Office 365 agreement, we're able to use various stock image resources that are available under Microsoft. In terms of sourcing video, then, I suppose obviously one of the most popular video sources in terms of educational video or any other form of video is simply YouTube. I know myself, anytime a pipe breaks in the house, anytime I need to know how to use a particular piece of software, my first stop really is YouTube. In terms of using YouTube, it's not exactly entirely clear, but generally using YouTube, when we link to a YouTube video, especially for educational purposes, attribution is kind of automatically covered. Generally, when we provide a link to a YouTube video, we're not claiming that work as our own. We're sending someone to YouTube, so it's clearly available. Or even when we embed a YouTube video into, for example, Canvas, we're certainly not trying to pass that work off as our own because embedded YouTube videos carry the logo. It's very clear it's a YouTube video, so on and so forth. So YouTube is actually, in terms of attributing work via YouTube, if it's on YouTube and you link to it or you embed it, embed the YouTube video, you're kind of covered. Generally, there isn't any kind of further requirements. Obviously, if material is made available under Creative Commons licenses, you try and abide by the license. But generally, we can link to YouTube videos or we can embed YouTube videos without worrying about whether we're acting ethically. Obviously, The alternative to that unethical use of it would be to simply would be to download a YouTube video and then upload it and try and pass it off as our own. In terms of being able to use, video material for teaching and learning purposes, there's a number of different ways of doing this in Canvas. So if we want to use YouTube, a very effective way of doing so is, if you see here, I'm in a page, but this could be an announcement and a quiz, anywhere where this rich content editor is visible. What we can simply do is we can click on the YouTube button, which is available up here. And what that will do is it will let us search YouTube and enter in a YouTube video directly into Canvas. So for example, if I look for MTU, probably should have been more specific, but we'll just embed this one. That will embed a YouTube video directly into Canvas. And again, all that is fine. As we can tell, it's clearly a YouTube video, so there's no concerns there in terms of attribution or similar. An alternative, if we don't want to use YouTube, might be to simply record a video of ourselves. We can do this using the button here for recording or uploading media. If we click on this, what we can do is we can click on the option to upload, record media. We can upload a video file if we have one, or else we can simply click record. Might be prompted maybe to, the first time you do this, to allow the browser to access your camera. But otherwise, you can simply you can turn on your webcam, you can begin recording, and you can record your webcam and your audio feed. If I'd known that this was not going to blur the background, which I should have thought of, I would have tidied up a little. But generally, once that's done, it will provide you with a preview of what's been done, and you can save media. And again, you can embed that into your Canvas page, your Canvas announcement, so on and so forth. So what I use this for quite often in my teaching is I send out announcements, but instead of typing in the text, I record a short video message for students. And that just serves to make it a little bit more personable, a little bit more engaging, a little bit more interesting. Additionally, there is another piece of software which is made available via the Department of TEL called ScreenPal. So if you go into our help doc section, telhelp.eu.helpdocs.com, or it's available, linkable from our website, tel.cit.ie. If you look for install ScreenPal, there are instructions there on how you can download a professional ScreenPal license. If you bear with me just while I switch to ScreenPal. ScreenPal is essentially a screen recording software, so will allow you to capture whatever is on screen. Now, ScreenPal will allow you to capture material on, excuse me, on your, which is available on your machine, or it will allow you to record your webcam, or it will allow you to record both simultaneously. The benefit of ScreenPal is you can record material, but the other thing you can do is, if you have something already available, you can click on the import option here, and you can identify an existing piece of video and pull that into ScreenPal also. So if I select this MP4, what that will do is it will simply pull it in to ScreenPal, and that will allow me to edit it, to amend it, to change it, so on and so forth. So ScreenPal is a very useful piece of software, and you can claim a professional ScreenPal license via the Department of TEL if you go onto the help doc area, or onto or if you go to tel.cit.ie, you can access our help docs area from there. In terms of remixing images, then if you have an image that you'd like to make some amendments to, excuse me, a very useful resource which I've found myself is Pixlr. So Pixlr is available at pixlr.com. What you can do with Pixlr is there's a number of different options available in terms of it, but if you select the Pixlr editor, what this will allow you to do is it will allow you to basically edit any images you have online. So for example, if I click open image, and if I just grab an image which is available to me, which I'm sure will come up any second now. Pixlr will basically allow me kind of similar to Photoshop, although maybe not as powerful. It will allow me to edit any particular image according to a number of different kind of according to a number of different options. So I'm afraid that my browser might have frozen up. If you just bear with me 2 seconds, I'm just going to shut that down and reopen it. Apologies for that. Please just bear with me 2 seconds while I get my slides back up. But Pixlr is a fully free resource, and it's browser based, which is actually quite useful because it essentially allows you to edit everything through a browser. So you don't need to worry about installing software or similar. It just lets you do everything through the browser, which is a pretty useful feature without having to worry about downloading content onto your additional applications and so forth onto your machine. Okay, so there's a number of options there in terms of being able to amend and remix images. In terms of remixing video, again, ScreenPal is a very useful kind of way of doing this. So with ScreenPal, once you have a copy downloaded, what you can do if you download a video is you can simply open it up, and then within ScreenPal, there is the option to edit video. So by selecting the option to edit video, what this will do is it will switch into, I suppose, a video editing mode. So you can move through the timeline by kind of moving the toolbar at the bottom along to get to the relevant point in the video that you want to. And from within there, then, if I click on the tools option, there's a number of different tools which are available to me. So for example, I might want to insert some text into this section to maybe clarify something to students. So I can select overlay, text, and then with the text pop-up that appears, I can simply put in the text. So this is an important bit. And I can amend the color of the pop-up, so on and so forth. Here, very often what I might do if I'm putting in some text like that is I might also put in a pause. So if I go to insert pause, that will basically just kind of mean that this part of the video, it will kind of stay along this, will stay stuck on the screen for let's say 6 seconds, which is useful when the text field comes up. So there's a number of different options available inside in ScreenPal. I found it to be a pretty good video editing application. So just by virtue of the fact that it allows you to record videos and then to kind of come in here and edit them, that's quite a useful feature. And like I mentioned earlier, it's kind of fully, ScreenPal is fully available. A professional license for it is fully available for any staff member in MTU. You just need to go and follow the instructions on our help doc to access a professional license for it. So an additional element then, which is available to MTU staff if you have access to Canvas, is H5P. So what H5P allows us to do is basically it is a plugin within Canvas which allows us to um, create interactive activities so that we can basically kind of take existing material and transform them into, for example, if we have video and interactive video or similar. So I don't think we'll have time to get into H5P2 detail today, but there will, I think, be additional sessions which will talk a bit more about H5P during the week. So if you are interested in creating your own interactive activities, come along to those. OERs then are basically what's referred to as open education resources. So OERs are essentially teaching and learning material that you can freely use and reuse without any charge or without any difficulty. So these are essentially um, specifically kind of resources which are made available explicitly for teaching and learning purposes, and again, which you can use and reuse without any difficulty. So the idea of making an OER available is really that you are giving it out to the world so that people can use it to support their teaching and learning however they wish to. So OERs are not a particularly new concept. I'm sure you'd be familiar with many OERs, which are freely available. They can take a number of different forms. So, for example, as electronic textbooks or journal, as subject-specific media, video images, assessment activities, all those various elements. So, anything at all, excuse me. So, any kind of material which is kind of freely available in, in the kind of higher education kind of sphere is generally kind of, you know, available as an OER in some format. Uh, Again, the same considerations arise in terms of using OERs with using somebody else's OERs. Just because the material or the OER is made available, as I said, with kind of that explicit notion of being available, freely available for people to use for their own teaching and learning purposes. That's not to say that, again, there aren't, considerations around how to use it ethically. So what most people would do when they make an OER available is they would simply make it available under a Creative Commons license. And again, as we know, we simply have to abide by the terms of that license. Um, Additional considerations when it comes to OERs, though, relate to very often, the suitability for purpose in terms of, is it going to fit into my teaching and learning, into my existing teaching and learning plan? The granularity is an important element. So, for example, some OERs might be very, very broad. They might consist of a recording which is 2 hours long. Another OER might be 5 minutes long. So by using the 2 hour one, the chances are there's probably going to be a lot of additional material covered, which is maybe not going to be hugely relevant to your own students. Equally, an OER that's 5 minutes long might not be kind of worth your time. It might be a bit too short to be of any actual practical values for you. So generally just kind of looking at these with, I think, practical consideration and just having an awareness of, is it going to fit my work? Um, that is a an important consideration when it comes to using OERs. So, and Marie asks as well, do royalties die with copyright? I'm not too sure about that, Anne Marie, to be honest. It's not something which I'm particularly familiar with. Um, I would imagine so, just on the basis of material entering into the public domain. I would imagine it becomes much, much harder to try and kind of generate royalties from that. So I would assume so, Anne-Marie, but it's something that I'll have to go away and look up, to be honest. And probably there's more informed people compared to me who could give you a better answer around that. A useful feature in terms of OERs in Canvas is basically this resource called Canvas Commons. I'm not sure if it's something which many of you might have come across before, but basically Commons is kind of this OER repository. So what you can do with Commons, which is available in Canvas over in the left-hand menu, is basically any Canvas user can make a module or a page or a course or a video or anything at all available to anyone else who's using Canvas. So, for example, if we wanted to look up, oh, I don't know, for example, STEM, what this will do then is it will, allow us to find existing OER material which is available. So, for example, maybe uh, a course around, for example, continuing education. And by clicking on that, what we can basically do is, if we want to, we can click on the import or download feature over here, and then we can import it into our own course, into our own module, so on and so forth. One of the advantages of Commons is that you can determine whether material should be made available to everyone, every single Canvas user across the world, or whether it's something that should be made available to only other people within MTU. So Canvas is there is the kind of the worldwide Canvas pool, But then there is also the specific MTU canvas pool, and material made available in the specific MTU canvas pool will only be available to other MTU users. So, for example, um, uh, Linda O'Sullivan and her colleagues in the teaching and learning unit, for example, have this MTU accessible Canvas template in Commons, which can be accessed and used by other MTU staff. So Commons is kind of a useful resource if you do want to share material more widely, or if you are looking for material to help kind of insert into your own course. Canvas can be, or excuse me, Commons can be quite a useful feature for that. An additional element then, if you are interested in OERs, is that there is actually going to be a conference around OERs, OER 24, in MTU on Wednesday the 27th and the 28th of March. And as it happens, Dr. Garrod O'Sullivan and Dr. Tom Farrelly are the conference co-chairs for this. So this is going to be an MTU conference, which is all about open educational resources, and it's an ALT conference, the Association for Learning Technology, which is quite a prestigious organization. So it's a big kind of coup for MTU to host something like that. And you can register for this conference if you'd be interested in coming along to it. And there's some really excellent speakers going to be at it. In terms of something else, which kind of I think affects, or which is an emerging area in the whole concept of ethical and fair use of material for teaching and learning, which is emerging at the moment, is very simply artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence or generative artificial intelligence or GAI or Gen AI generators, things like DALI, even things like ChatGPT, these tools are basically trained on hundreds of thousands of images or writers or existing material made by human creators. These systems are trained by looking at those, filtering those, going through those, so on and so forth. Now, maybe if you want to maybe just give me a yes or a no answer into the Q&A section, what do ye think? Does this constitute fair use, or does this constitute appropriation? Should these generative AI tools, should they be these tools be subject to some form of copyright obligation? Or is, the process of training themselves on human beings' work and human beings' labor, is that fair use, or is that appropriation? So Debbie says that it's appropriation. If you don't mind, Debbie, could I maybe just ask you to, yeah, just share your thoughts on that? And there's no right or wrong answer here. There's certainly no gotcha. I'm just genuinely curious to hear your own thoughts on that. So I've given you mic permissions there, Debbie. If you want to turn on your mic and kind of expound on your answer, please feel free to do so. Be really interested to hear your thoughts.
I think sometimes we put things up not expecting them to be used. There isn't any copyright and people can modify it as they wish, or pretend to be the person who said it, or use somebody else's voice or face. So there's all kinds of modifications that can happen.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Debbie. And as you said, in particular, when it comes to things like, potentially people's voices, their faces, their kind of, yeah, their voices essentially. And I'm using the kind of not just their auditory voice, but like, one's voice, one's kind of presentation of oneself to the world. All of that can certainly be kind of modified by these generators. There is no kind of clear answer at the moment. It is, as identified in the headline there, it's a bit of a minefield at the moment because, these kind of concepts are not something which has been they're not things which have come up before. They're not considerations which have come up before. Something which is produced by a machine isn't produced by any one individual. So therefore, should it be subject to the same, laws, the same rules? And in particular, when we do consider that essentially these machines are, training themselves or they've learned to develop material based on, using other people's material without any permission, surely that's a breach. But then they're machines, they're not people. So are they subject to the same laws? And does, the same way if I'm trying to become a director, I will obviously learn from watching other people's movies or kind of, I'll kind of copy styles and techniques and so on and so forth used by Scorsese's and other great directors out there. There's no law against that. So it's a real minefield at the moment in terms of copyright law and how generative AI is or should kind of affect that or tie into that or deal with that. Now, I had hoped to do an activity where we could maybe have a chat about this, but I've just about hit the 45 minutes and I am conscious of potentially people having to go to classes or having to run off at 11. But I guess, yeah, maybe just, you know, something to consider. And we are hoping to maybe, um, facilitate more discussion around this whole area. But yeah, it does come back to that original question. If a generative AI system produces some form of material, should that be free to use? Because it's not made by any one human individual. A different question as to whether we can use it is whether we should use it. What implications if these generative AI tools are, essentially hoovering up other people's work without permission and using it to produce bespoke images, you know, as educators, what is our obligation to not use that, or in what way can we use that ethically? So it's a really interesting area. There's no clear answers, but that does seem as good a place as any to kind of finish up, just on 45 minutes on the dot. Um, so look, as always, thanks so much everyone for coming along to the sessions. If you do have any questions, I'm very happy to take those now in the Q&A area about anything and everything that we've covered. Otherwise, so please, I'll hang around for a few minutes, so please do feel free to type in any questions you have. Otherwise, if you have to head away, thanks so much for coming. We'll make the recording available afterwards. And yeah, I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their week and hopefully talk to you again soon. So thanks very much, everyone. Hi, Debbie. So if you email edtech@mtu.ie, that is probably the best way to get help. But if you want to go to our website at tel.cit.ie, what you can do is you can go into the staff resources and our help docs and articles are available right there. So if you're interested in ScreenPal, for example, guidelines on accessing a license are available in that area. Okay, thanks very much, everyone. Take care.